you touch upon two issues that really will determine, at least shape, Europe's response, and they are the global economy and then Europe itself in 2025. So, will the global economy muddle along, or is there substantially more trouble ahead?
Um, well, I am pessimistic again here because I think we have three factors. We have record global debt, we have rising protectionism, and we have currency wars. So on December 3rd, Reuters reported that global debt had hit a new record of 323 billion. Sorry, I must be wrong. That can't be true. It has to be 323 trillion, not billion. My apologies. That is a crazy number. The world GDP is, give or take, 100 trillion per year, a little more. And so that's a debt GDP ratio that is pretty crazy. But it's not just governments, of course. This is total debt. The Institute of International Finance reports that sovereign debt could rise by a third by 2028, hitting 130 trillion and increasing repayment risks. Now, note this year, both France and Germany, governments felt they couldn't agree upon a budget. In Germany, of course, there was the limit that you couldn't cross this deficit limit, and it fell precisely over the question, should we make cuts to social services or should we continue funding or even increase funding to Ukraine? And you can't say you will cut heating benefits and student benefits and give money to Ukraine when people are facing very high unemployment. But I digress. The key thing is we've had slowing of growth. Um, China has seen a collapse of its real estate bubble. We've talked ad nauseum about how the Chinese economy, because of people keeping their savings in real estate instead of, say, equity markets or even bond markets, has the downward spiral. Consumption is really hard to go up. Demand is really hard to increase in China. And China, therefore, has bet big on its export-led model. Its rise, starting from 1978, when Deng Xiaoping said it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it catches mice, was because of manufacturing, because of an export-led growth. And that sputtered a little bit during the COVID years. Of course, you could argue there were weaknesses even before then because labor costs were rising. But still, China was and is the factory of the world. And during the COVID years, and Trump's protectionism put a dent in it. But China has bet big on a China shock 2.0, as some would say. And that is China shock is the paper written about what happened after China came to the global economy. On the one hand, there were winners. You could get cheap ironing boards and irons and kettles and whatnot in Walmart or on Amazon. But at the same time, a lot of countries deindustrialized. It wasn't just the US. Industry just went away, even from places like India to China. I have friends in industry, captains of industry in India, who said they just had to close certain factories down because they couldn't compete. So there is weakness in all the major. There are weaknesses in all the major economies: the EU, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, the US, of course. Even though the US is doing rather well as of now, still protectionism threatens to increase inflation. Protectionism also threatens to lead to countermeasures by others, and of course, just as we had Hood Smalley, was it Hood Smalley? Am I getting the name right, Glenn? The
The protectionist
protectionist
tax.
acts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now we are seeing currency wars. And very important thing to note is that um, Donald Trump's advisors are aiming to depreciate the US dollar whilst ensuring it remains the world's reserve currency. And so they are trying to emulate what Richard Nixon achieved in 1973 after the Vietnam War, when he took the dollar out of the gold standard. And also what the Ronald Reagan administration managed to do through the 1985 Plaza Accord, when allies with a trade surplus, France, West Germany, Japan, and the UK, agreed with the US to depreciate the dollar. On both these occasions, the dollar continued to be the reserve currency of the world. And Trump insiders, a key aim of theirs is to boost industry. As I said, they see all of this as an integrated strategy. Lower immigration, increased wages. Protectionism, increased wages, and industrial protect and industrial product increased industrial production. Cheaper dollar, cheaper exports, more competitive American industry, better manufacturing, better working class jobs.
So here, I think we'll reverse roles, and whereas I, as the American, am supposed to obsess about the quarterly results, and you, as an Indian, think in terms of millennia, we will reverse our perspectives here, and I certainly agree that. Well, no, I think that 2024 will be no. The problem,
2025.
I share your concern. Five, yes, pardon me. I share your concern about some of the problems, but I think that they will not manifest themselves significantly in 2025, even if Donald Trump does everything conceivable wrong from every perspective imaginable. Um, Although he's setting the conditions for a lot of problems, and he may well guarantee. The thing with protectionism is that it will guarantee that a country can produce the finest horse harnesses in the world at a time when the world is developing EVs and rocket ships. It freezes technology in place. And the thought, this is an old argument that goes back to Margaret Thatcher and well before, that the deindustrialization is a sign of weakness. It creates tremendous social problems, which is why we have the Trump phenomenon in the United States and social unrest in the AfD in Germany and so on in Europe. Because of the social consequences of economic change. However, to try to maintain strong industrial manufacturing bases is to freeze the economy. And the cutting edges of the economy 80 years ago were industrial processes. 40 years ago and today they became services. The cutting and 40 years ago and today high tech, what we used to call when I was a student, high tech industries that are not labor intensive, which is a social issue as well as an economic one. So that's the debate. It's an old one, and you coherently you put out the Trump, the standard conservative Republican argument coherently, but even if they succeed in doing what they wish, the problems that will bring, I think we both agree, probably will not occur in 2025. My own view is that the year 2025 economically, globally, will be relatively successful, which does not mean that the underlying problems you touched upon are not grave and something we need to deal with. The U.S. GDP is projected to rise 2.5%, roughly. Global GDP of the G20, which is over 90% of the world's GNP, it will be 3.3% globally. The EU collectively will be about 1%. Now that's, you could argue, anemic, but that is 1% growth, not recession. China will be 4.8%, which is far less than their phenomenal figures of the past 40 years, but is robust itself, particularly in a country that is experiencing absolute population declines now every year. India will be 6% or so. So U.S. debt is about 2.6% of its GDP. The EU's between 2 and 2.5%. These are issues to address, but that will not bring short-term, as in 2025, issues. The U.S. will have a economically existential issue with its debt 20 to 30 years from now. To address the debt problem in the United States would require some combination of revenue increases, which means tax increases, or spending cuts, which means budgetary reductions by the federal government in particular, of about 2 to 2.5% net. To address the structural deficit issue in the United States, the U.S. has been incapable of doing anything. But that is not a grave series of demands and sacrifices that will be called upon if our political system can engender the coherency to do so. So I'm more sanguine about 2025 economically, and long term, I also see the issues as addressable, if ever. And here perhaps is the pipe dream. The U.S. political system, in particular, can address its structural deficit issue. Because if the United States does, the fallout effects globally will be substantial. So I see 2025 as a relatively benign year economically, barring a tsunami or a tsunami-like black swan event.
Well, I think the chances of a black swan event have increased because of the political risk that you talk about. The structural problems that you talk about in the US are not going away. The structural problems in the global system are not going away. And I'll just pull up a graph here, which Sanjay Acharya, our managing partner at FOI, made. And look at the currencies of all the different trading partners. They've been depreciating regularly. So we do have a situation where we are in a modern version of Smoot-Hawley. Currency wars are already taking place, although no one has announced it. The rupee is at 85, a record low. It is most likely to go to 100. And there will be shocks. Look, the yield the French have to pay on their debt has gone up, and rightly so. They couldn't manage to agree to pass a budget. Their deficit is 6.1% of the GDP. And if we go through the strains in different economies, something's got to give. In 2007, 2008, if you looked at 2007, if you looked at all the GDP figures for 2008, you'd say it would be all right. But I think the strains and the political tensions and the structural imbalance mean that something could give, and something could give in pretty early, especially given the fractious political environment we live in, because economics is never divorced from politics.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.